see anybody else besides the people in this room, and neither can I right now, but there are people out there. And as I mentioned, it's being live streamed. This class is being live streamed, and it will also be available on the Global Day of Jewish Learning's website to watch after the fact. And Karen knows that the last time I taught this class, last year at around this time of year, and I was here in Chicago, and there was a tornado warning on that day. But since I'm from New Jersey, it didn't occur to me that one should not go out in a tornado warning, so I just came here to teach. It was a very small crowd, and today I woke up and it was snowing, and I thought, oh, great, you can always depend on the Chicago weather for something. So if you have friends who missed it because of the weather or for whatever other reason, you can tell them that they can watch this class on the Global Day of Jewish Learning website. And as I mentioned, this source sheet is totally available online, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So this year's theme for the Global Day of Jewish Learning has to do with biblical characters, and I've chosen to speak about Rachel, about Rachel, the biblical matriarch Rachel. And I will say that I am a little bit out of my element because I very rarely teach topics that have to do with Bible. Really just, it's not the thing that I most often teach. And I was hesitant at first about even preparing this class, but I've always had a fascination with Rachel, a fascination with Rachel. And I'll tell you, as like a teaser right off the bat, that my fascination with Rachel has almost nothing to do with the stories that appear about her in Genesis. Even though if I asked you, where you knew about Rachel from, you'd probably tell me it's from the book of Genesis. We'll get to it pretty soon. We're not quite there. We're only up to Rivka in the Torah portions right now. We will get there soon. And that's where she's, I guess, most famous from, but not for me. For me, I've always been more familiar with her midrashic personality and her personality as it's expressed in certain other texts. And so it occurred to me that I wanted to kind of put the pieces together, that I wanted to take some of the accounts of what she does or how she's portrayed in the book of Genesis and put that together with some of the stories about her that especially capture the rabbinic imagination and that are told about her elsewhere in other sources. So we're going to explore Rachel from that perspective, not focus so much on the stories you might all know about her in Genesis, although we will look at that a little bit, but really in a broader lens, really thinking about the role that she's played in rabbinic tradition, the way that the rabbis have cast her, and the role that she's been sort of meant to play. And specifically, I'm interested in Rachel's voice. And this is one of those things, there's a name for this, but I forget what it's called. It's like, until you're looking for something, you don't see it, but then once you notice it, you see it everywhere, that type of thing. So that happened to me with thinking about Rachel's voice. And I'm not going to say more than that right now because I want to see if it's going to happen to you also, now that I've planted that idea in your mind. So let's look at these sources together. And we'll think about that, and we'll think about it again, viewing Rachel specifically through the lens of her voice. So I'm not starting even from the beginning of Rachel's life. Like I said, I'm not so Breshit focused here. And so part one on your source sheets is called the barren wife. This is one of Rachel's primary roles, perhaps. As you know, you probably know the matriarchs in general. There's sort of a trend among the matriarchs that they have trouble conceiving, at least at first. And it's a struggle for them to have children. And that's sort of an integral part of the way that the whole book of Genesis is built, is that you have this amazing matriarch, and she's wonderful, and the relationship is great, but she's not able to have children, and then the story develops from there. So that's true as well with Rachel. Rachel, of course, is married to Yaakov, and she's in an interesting situation, because who else is married to Yaakov? Her sister. Her sister is also married to Yaakov. Her sister Leah. So the first source here is from Parak Lamed, from chapter 30 of Genesis, and Rachel is not having children, and Leah is. That's the story goes on like that for a while. But here's what the verses say. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister. Vatera Rachel ki lo yalda leYaakov, v'tikaneh Rachel ba'achotah. And she said unto Jacob, give me children, or else I die. V'tomer Yaakov, hava li banim, v'im ayin meta anochi. That's a lot of emotion, a lot of story right there in a nutshell. So again, she sees that she's not having children. She envied her sister, and she said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. So before we even get to Jacob's reaction, you have to look at this verse, you have to sort of look at it twice. Because on the face of it, this is like such a sort of obvious thing, right? Her sister has children, she has no children, she feels jealous. You could block out the word children or replace it with anything. I have 2 sisters, so I know, right? So your sister has X, you don't have X, so there's jealousy. But look again at the verse. What prompts Rachel's jealousy in this verse? Why is she jealous according to this pasuk? Anyone want to look at the source sheet and tell me? So interesting. It's because she has no children, but it doesn't say anything about Leah's children in this verse. Not in the verse immediately preceding it either. It says Rachel saw that she wasn't having children, and so she envied Leah. And I think if I were writing this verse, and what I meant to say is that she was envious of her sister having children, I would have said, no, what Rachel saw was her sister's children. Rachel saw that her sister was having children, and so Rachel envied her sister. I think that's the way I've told myself the story in my mind, but that's not what the verse says. The verse doesn't say that Rachel saw Leah having children. What Rachel saw was that she wasn't having any children. It's an interesting sort of jumping off point for a feeling of jealousy. Not so much looking at what her sister had, but looking at what she did not have. And then the next part, of course, her reaction then is very, very extreme. Hava livanim v'im meta, no, give me children or else I'll die. Which is, it's extreme, right? Meaning maybe you judge her for it, maybe you don't. Maybe you think this is a reasonable response to not having any children, or maybe not. But I think we can all agree it's a very, very intense and passionate outburst. It doesn't in any way match, let's say, Sarah's reaction to not having children, or Rivka's. It's a totally different universe of discourse. And to me, this is the first moment where we really get to know something about Rachel's inner character. Kind of feel like, and again, I didn't bring you her sort of past history, but kind of feel like everything we have about her up till then is more like sort of, I don't know, fits in with the matriarch story, sort of better overall. But these 2 psukim, to me, these 2 verses are where things where she starts to really stand out. First of all, again, what she sees is that she doesn't have children. That's the impetus for the jealousy. And then she says to Jacob, give me children or I'll die, which is a very, again, it's just a very intense way of speaking. And I think something we're going to see throughout is that Rachel has these very intense reactions to things. She's just that kind of person. She has this jealousy and she just sort of lashes out. And so Jacob actually gets angry at her. And he says to her, am I in place of God? Am I in place of God? Am I the one who's prevented you from having children? And the conversation ends there. We don't hear her response. So she sees that she has no children. She gets really angry and lashes out. And Yaakov, we could spend a long time sort of analyzing his response, but one thing I think you could say is that he doesn't handle this super well. It doesn't seem like this is like this conversation is going anywhere. I've always wondered if the reason the Torah doesn't tell us the rest of this conversation is because like you could sort of imagine the rest, like it just went downhill from there. Has always been my feeling with this conversation. Right? This was not going anywhere. What she says is really, really not constructive. It's not a way, I know, like I've read some of these articles like how to have an argument with your spouse, right? This is not a way to have an argument with your spouse. And his response for sure is also not a way to have an argument with your spouse. Right? He basically says to her, first of all, it's not my fault. And second of all, by the way, you know who's doing this to you, right? It's clearly God. God must have his reasons, right? That's not me, sweetie, right? Not me, and it's God. So the other question that I put on here is how you understand Jacob's response to Rachel. And again, I do feel like she's very extreme and she causes very extreme reactions in other people. And then again, I'll keep coming back to the fact that it's not what Leah has, but what she lacks that makes her jealous. And I think in some sense, it's worse, it's better. People have argued that it's better in terms of her relationship with her sister, right? She wasn't looking at her sister and saying, I want what you have. But there's I think it's a deeper sense of sadness in a way, that she really looked inside herself. She really looked and thought, oh, this is what I don't have, right? I'm missing this. And she felt it as a deep personal lack, almost in some ways, not just in comparison to her sister. She really felt, I have no children, and this is a deep lack, and she lashes out in this way. Rashi commenting on this idea of envy, is picking up on this fact that it doesn't say she envied, her sister's children. It just says, she saw that she had no children. So Rachel envied her sister. This is source number 2. Rashi says, Rachel envied her good deeds. Okay? Rachel wasn't jealous of Leah's children. That's why it doesn't say that she was jealous of Leah's children. She had no children, and she was jealous of Leah's good deeds. Amra, she said to herself, this is Rachel speaking, were she not more righteous than I, she would not have merited to have children. Now this, right, as strange as the language is of Rachel's jealousy, this is not, I think, an instinctive interpretation of Rachel's jealousy, because you all told me, again, what was Rachel jealous of? Seems from the verse. She has no children, right? It seems pretty clear from the verse that she had no children. So the question is, why would Rashi select this interpretation, right? Why does Rashi, and Rashi is selecting in this case, this is a midrashic interpretation, so Rashi had, as is so often the case, Rashi has the full menu of midrashic options laid out in front of him when he provides his interpretation, and he chooses this one. He chooses to say that Rachel's jealousy is based on the fact that she thought her sister had more good deeds, because had her sister not had more good deeds, she would not have merited to have children instead of Rachel. And the reason that I mention this in this specific context is because here you begin to see, this is the first window for us today into the rabbinic conception of Rachel. Meaning, again, you could read the verses, you can argue with Rashi, you can argue with me, and you can say, no, really what she was jealous, it's all about children. But the rabbis, right from the start, even though Rachel, again, I feel like her response to not having children is very harsh, right? Give me children, else I'll die. I feel like good Jews are not supposed to speak that way. But that's her response. But the rabbis, almost from the beginning, read her in this very, very positive light. And again, pick up on the ambiguities in the verses here and say, well, what she was really upset about is that she hadn't merited to have children. She hadn't merited to have children, and her sister had merited to have children, and that's what was really, really getting to her in these verses. Which is, again, maybe not an instinctive reading, but speaks to the fact that, that Rachel had this very deep religious passion. And by the way, then it makes Yaakov's response also more appropriate, right? Because Yaakov says to her, am I in God's place? That it's a slightly less harsh response if you think, well, she was thinking about God all along. She wasn't focused on her sister. She was focused on herself, the fact that she hadn't merited to have children, the fact that God had not granted her children. And so what Yaakov says to her is, listen, as you well know, this is between you and God. Right? This is not about me. This is not about your sister even. This is between you and God. And this then will kick off, again, at least in the rabbinic view, that close personal relationship that Rachel has with God that we'll see developed throughout her life. Did you have a question?
No, I was thinking the second well.
Yeah. Great. So eventually, as you know, it pays off, whatever it is that Rachel was doing. We think she was praying, and you'll see why in a minute. It does pay off, and Rachel does have children. And so the next section that I brought for you, part 2, is Rachel as the mother. These verses also from Genesis 30. Vatomer Rachel zanani Elohim gam shema koli layitem li ben al ken karash shmo Dan. So this is not directly from her, but this is from her handmaid, right? She gives her handmaid. What's the modern English for handmaid? I don't even know, maidservant, but I feel like that's not that much more modern. So the woman, right, who's working for her, who she gives to her husband to have children with, which is sort of beyond, I think, the modern imagination of what you might do. But she does that. So Bilhah has a son. Rachel names him Dan. But what she says is, God has judged me and has also heard my voice and has given me a son. So she gets a child after yelling at her husband that she didn't have children, giving her husband her handmaid to sleep with, and immediately, what does she say about how she got this child? She's totally focused on God here, right? It's all about God, right? God has judged me, God's heard my voice, and God's given me a son. So first of all, God's judged me. So speaking to that point about if I think this reinforces the rabbinic interpretation, right? She was worried that God was judging her, and that's why she didn't have children. And now that her handmaid has produced a child for her husband, this is God's judgment, right? God has now sort of rejudged me, right? I've now been judged to merit having a child, and she has a son now. Yeah.
Has she tried give a hand to fire to the reflection that God is using? I mean, because it's obviously not the body, her own body.
Right.
So
No, I mean, so I think she's responding. It seems like it's good enough, right? It's like it's better than nothing. I mean, you see that right throughout Genesis, you see that this is a reasonable consolation prize, right? Like when Sarah can't have children and she says, "Will you take Hagar?" Right? That's considered to be, it's good, right? Then she gets Yitzchak, and that's better, right? So I'd say the same dynamic is in play here. To me, she seems fully thankful for this. It's only going to get better when she has her own, sort of. Yeah.
How old was Raquel when she married Jacob?
Yeah, really young. Really, really young. You think that has something to do with it? Yeah, maybe. But again, it's interesting, right? So what she says here is God has judged me, right? And judgment is, I don't know. I think sometimes it has like a negative connotation, right? But here it's used positively. I mean, when we think about din, right, Hashem's judgment, no, God has judged me and clearly not found me lacking because now I have a child. Danani Elohim, V'gam shema b'koli, and God listened to my voice. So now, since I've told you to look at this all through the lens of voice, this is our first actual shout out. God has heard my voice. What did Rachel say to God? I don't know, right? I'm not really sure what Rachel said to God because we don't have a record of that conversation. If anything, the one interpretation of the dynamic between Rachel and her husband is that Rachel says to Jacob, "I don't have any children," and he says, "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" And another midrashic tradition says that what she wanted him to do was pray because that was the way it was supposed to work. That's the way it worked with his parents, with Yitzchak, right? That Yitzchak prayed for Rivka to have children, and that worked out. But here, we don't have any account of her praying. We don't know that she prayed to God, and yet everybody, all the Rishonim, all of the commentaries notice that it says Shama b'koli. God heard my voice. So even though we don't hear her actively speaking to God, nonetheless, clearly she feels that she did. Right? There's some off-the-record conversation that happened, some off-the-record prayer, and it's her voice that God hears. At least that's what she believes. It's her voice that God hears. Shama b'koli, right? Heard my voice. It's the same word that's used when the Torah says to listen to someone. Lishmoa b'kol. It's not just like to hear somebody's prayer. It's to obey, right? Lishmoa b'kol, so and so. God has obeyed my voice. She spoke, and God listened. Not going to be the last time we see that dynamic with Rachel.
For peace in the family.
For peace, yeah, maybe. And therefore she calls him Dan. And then Bilhah has another child, has a second child, and Rachel has the same type of reaction. Naftuli Elokim, Niftalti imachoti. With mighty wrestlings, I've wrestled with my sister and have prevailed, and she calls his name Naphtali. So now we get back to her sister, right? She's wrestled with her sister, and she's prevailed because now she has another son. But again, what's the wrestling with her sister that's being referenced here? Unclear, right? Because we don't have also an account of that conversation. Rachel is doing a lot of talking, there's a lot of activity going on with Rachel just out of view of the text, right? Behind the scenes. She names these children, and she names them again in relationship to God, and the second one also references her sister. Do you want to say something? No. Okay. And then finally, Vayizkor Elohim et Rachel, Vayishma Aleha Elohim, Vayiftach et Rahman. Here again, God remembers Rachel, and once again, God listened to her. This time it's listened. It's not likol. It's not he obeyed her voice. He listened to her. God listened to her and opened her womb. And then she subsequently does have her own children, not just via her handmaid. And it's not clear, just as, and you can ask this question with the matriarchs in general, there's a lot of sort of lack of clarity surrounding the barrenness, and then, right, why does God make them barren, and then why does God relent in the end? And we don't know exactly, but here it's very clear each time that the response, again, it's all about the relationship between God and Rachel. God hears Rachel, God listens to her voice. She feels that way, right? Even when her handmaid starts having children, she feels that God has listened to her. And God, in fact, records, the Torah, in fact, records that God listened to Rachel's voice. And this is not lost on the rabbinic interpreters. And Rachel's voice becomes sort of its own, I think you could really say its own sort of mythical character in Midrashic lore. So to me, the most famous sort of account of this Rachel-God relationship is in the following source in Megillah. And it's actually, when I first created this source, when I first taught this class, I so instinctively went to this source. It was only after reading it a few times that I realized it doesn't really tell the whole story. But I'll read it to you and you'll tell me what you think, and then we'll sort of fill in some of the gaps. So the Gemara in Megillah, the Talmud in Masechet Megillah, as part of the Gemara in Masechet Megillah has all sorts of great lists, like sort of almost like People Magazine top 10 lists of great biblical characters, that kind of thing. It tells you who the beautiful women were, and it tells you who the prophetesses were, and all those things. So at this point, it's talking about biblical characters who were famously modest. So Rachel makes the list of biblical characters who were famously modest. They are known for their modesty. And as a reward for her modesty, Shaul was one of her descendants. Okay, that's just the general context here. And then one of Shaul's descendants was Esther, so technically Esther is descended from Rachel as well, and that's a great merit. And then the Gemara asks, what was the great modesty that was displayed by Rachel? Because again, it's not so clear in the story. If anything, I would say that her cry against Jacob, right, give me children. It's not, sort of not a reserved, very modest kind of response. But here's the story that the Gemara tells, and this story, we're going to see versions of this all over the place. When Yaakov first meets Rachel, and he tells her, we're actually related, and he tells her about the relationship, and it's not exactly, right, he says that he was her father's brother. He wasn't actually her father's brother, he was actually the son of her father's sister. Fine, not so important, but according to the Midrash, he said to her, will you marry me? And he met her and he said, Minsabali, Amrale, in. She says, yes. Okay, we know that part of the story. And then she says, Mihu Abba Ramahu. But listen, my father is a cheater. You should just know. My father's a cheater, or you could translate this as a trickster. He's that's what he does. V'lo yachaltle. And you, husband to be, you will not be able to stand up to him. And he says back to her, Jacob says back to Rachel, Achiv ana beramaut. I am his brother in trickery. I'm his brother in cheating. Now, of course, it's helpful here to remember Yaakov's background. Why is he able to give just as good as he gets? Why is he also a trickster or a cheater? Yeah, he switched. He dressed up as his brother, right? So he's like, listen, you should know a bit about my history, right? I'm not so great either. And she says, well, is that really allowed? This part I really like. She says, are righteous people allowed to engage in cheating? And he says, yes, you can cheat other cheaters, you just can't cheat good people. Okay, fine. But here's really the essence of the story. He says to her, well, explain, like, why is this so bad? Like, your father's a cheater. Okay, like, what's he going to do? So she says, Itli achta de kashisha minai. I have an older sister. And he's not going to marry me off before he marries her off. And Rachel knew that. Masar la simanim. So Yaakov gives Rachel certain signs, signs that will indicate that she is in fact Rachel and not Leah. Kimata lele, when the night came, meaning the night that they were getting married, she said to herself, you know what, my sister is going to be embarrassed. And so she gives her sister the signs that Jacob had given her. And And that's why it says in the verse, which is like a funny way of writing the verse from Bereshit, "Vayihi b'boker v'hinehi Leah." Behold, in the morning it was Leah. What do you mean, behold, in the morning it was Leah? This is after Jacob marries her. It was Leah all along. No. He didn't know it was Leah. He thought it was Rachel, and there's this whole darkness thing, and maybe she was veiled, and we have veiling in our tradition, and fine. But the rabbis say no. Actually, Rachel helped her sister, helped her father, trick Yaakov into thinking that she was in fact Leah. Right? Ad hashta, and this was a great form of modesty displayed by Rachel. Right? Not modesty, I think, in the sense that we often misuse the word today, right? Because there's nothing, she wasn't covering up more of her body or, hiding herself. It's not modest to not marry the guy that you love. That's not the modesty. I think it's modesty in the more traditional sense of Hatznei alacharim Hashem alakecha, of behaving modestly in relation with God, really, in relation with God and with other human beings. She took a step back. She sort of contracted herself. She said, okay, like I want this and he wants this and whatever, but at the end of the day, when my father is already doing this, I can't let my sister be embarrassed. That's more important. And she gave over these signs to her sister. You think it's innocence on her part in what sense?
In the sense that that'd be a good idea. Yeah, I'll try my sister to protect care.
Maybe. I mean, it's a really interesting. Again, it's like an interesting use of the word modesty, right? Because we wouldn't normally think of that as like that's what's modest, is to like let your sister marry your fiance. And it's strange, right? I mean, I think that this does read, at least from a modern perspective, as like, wow, that was like a little above and beyond, right? Like, okay, she let her sister marry the guy who she was supposed to marry. That's like really extreme. But this is the rabbinic story, and they're sticking with it. They stick with it throughout, and I think that again, I think it explains a few things. First of all, it has to do with it. It further sort of cements this relationship between Rachel and God, because now if you think about what happened, and it sort of explains all the relationships. Because think about who knew what at what time, or pretend you're like solving a mystery. It's like a game of Clue. Right? So Rachel knows from the beginning, according to the story, that her father is going to marry her sister off first. And maybe Leah knows it too. And Jacob knows because Rachel told him. And God knows. And now the night comes and the switch actually happens. So again, Rachel knows, Leah knows, their father knows, but Jacob, right, poor Yaakov, Jacob does not know, right? Yaakov doesn't know that it's being switched. So right away, I mean, it's a terribly inauspicious start, right? And the rabbis never record the conversation that had to have come afterwards, right? When Yaakov is inevitably going to meet up with Rachel and say, wait, we knew this was coming, we planned for this, we had a contingency plan, what happened, right? And she's going to have to say, no, I just decided I couldn't do that to my sister. I don't know, like, we never really find out how Jacob feels about that. But this is in the rabbinic imagination, at least, this is, I think, the beginning of this strong connection between Rachel and God. Because God for sure knows what's going on in the story. And everyone else has sort of just a piece of the puzzle or their own perspective, right? Leah wanting to not have her sister get married before her. Their father just wanting to, sort of as a trickster, wanting to cheat Yaakov out of what he deserves. Yaakov just not getting the wife that he deserves, right? But Rachel has this sort of intensity of purpose and full picture, and God has this knowledge of what she's doing. To me, this is the start of that relationship. Yeah, you had a question.
Something that happens just before, where she's asking, is a righteous person allowed to trick? Because it is also that kind of,
Yes.
in terms of who's tricking who. And Yaakov said yes,
Right. Yeah, totally. I think that's what the story. I totally think that's what the story was saying. So the question was, right before Rachel tricks Yaakov, she asks, "Is it really okay for a righteous person to trick?" And I mean, Yaakov's story is such the tricking, that he does. It's meaning when he steals the blessing, it comes back to haunt him in 1,000 different ways. And this is a midrashic way that it comes back to haunt him, right? She says, maybe innocently, "Oh, you're really allowed to trick people?" And he says, "Well, if the other person's a trickster," having just told her that he himself is a trickster. And she's like, "Well, okay," right? So she gets to trick him, and she does, in fact.
But the other point, they probably know that there are multiple wives affinities or mirrored, or maybe she knows other people who are multiple lives. So it's not such a terrible thing. I'll share them with my sister.
I do have the sense that she knows that she'll eventually marry him. I don't think, even just the way the story is worded, I don't think she thinks that she's giving up the chance to marry him.
Yeah.
She knows she's going to get to marry him, but still, I mean, there's like a 7-year lag, right? There's, it's not nothing, and it's still a big deal. Like I said, I think it's a strange thing to do because it's, right from the beginning, sort of undermining her relationship with her husband. But I think really from this point on in the story, maybe a little bit, even in the biblical story itself, there's a way in which, as much as Yaakov is in love with Rachel, their story is not, it's not the perfect love story. Their relationship is undermined in some way, even from the beginning, and maybe, the expression of this rabbinic undermining is in that story where she says to him, "Give me children, otherwise I die." Right? And he says, "Am I in God's place?" Because there's always this real godly presence in their relationship. There's always, and sometimes it's Leah in their relationship, it's God in their relationship. There always seems to be some other force working on their relationship. It's never just the two of them. As in fact, it really is never just the two of them, right? Because she's the second wife, not the first wife. But
amazing patience with God, though.
Amazing. She is amazingly patient with God. And I think that also speaks to the intensity of the relationship, right? Even just the fact that every time that she has a child, she refers to God, and she sees it as God rewarding her, even though someone else may have been like, God, I've waited a long time, right? I'm not going to get all happy now, right? When, however many years after the fact, you finally give me what I want. This story is repeated again and again in rabbinic literature, and becomes, again, once you're sort of immersed in not just the story of Rachel, like I said, as it appears in the Bible, but when you get immersed in the whole world of rabbinic texts and how Rachel is perceived of as a matriarch, she is in some ways the matriarch, even more so than anyone who you would say is the patriarch. She is Rachel, and this midrash, which I quoted here from the Gemara and Megillah, there are other versions, takes on sort of epic proportions. So I'm going to skip actually source number 6 right now, and go to source number 7. Look at these verses in Jeremiah. So I will say that although I rarely teach Bible, if I am going to teach Bible, I love teaching from the book of Yirmiyahu, from the book of Jeremiah, and these are beautiful verses about Rachel. So Rachel makes an appearance in Yirmiyahu also. Ko amar Hashem, kol b'raman nishma, nehi b'chitz hamurim, Rachel mevaka al baneha, me'ana lehinachem al baneha ki. This is what God says. A voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are not, or because they are gone. This is in Jeremiah's accounting of the exile, that the Jewish people are going to be exiled. And we have all sorts of stories from all over rabbinic literature. You can find it in the liturgy as well. We have stories of the departed avot and imahot, of the departed patriarchs and matriarchs saying, crying, praying to God, saying this is a terrible thing. The Jewish people have been sent into exile. This is terrible. This is Yirmiyahu putting Rachel in that role. So she's refusing to be comforted. Ko amar Hashem, mini kolech midechi ve'inayich mitima, ki yesh sachar lepulatech neum Hashem b'shavu me'eretz oyeh. God says, stop crying, withhold your voice from crying, and your eyes from tears, because your work will be rewarded. They're going to come back from the land of the enemy. And there's hope for their future, for your future, and your children are going to return to their own border. So whereas some parts of Yirmiyahu are a lot more of a downer than this, right? Jeremiah, after all, is the prophet of the destruction of the temple. This is an up note in the book of Jeremiah, where Rachel is crying for her children, and God says, don't cry anymore, your work is going to be rewarded. Your children are going to be redeemed. And the commentaries go crazy about this, and for reasons that I think are not immediately evident. For me, I read these verses and I immediately make the connection, but I'm hoping that looking at it with maybe fresher eyes, you can help me uncover a little bit of what's going on here. The rabbis see these verses and they immediately connect it to that midrash I showed you from Masechet Megillah. They immediately connect it to this great modesty of Rachel's, to this great zchut, this great merit of Rachel's, that she was willing to give up the simanim for her sister. That she is, again, the one of all the matriarchs and patriarchs. And I think, although like I said, the modesty is like a little strange, it's clear, I think, really from the beginning of her story that she has a special relationship with God, that she has a way of crying out, she has a way of being in a relationship with people, but having God in the relationship. And there's something just special about that. And there are all sorts of sources about this. I didn't put the source on here. This is from the Midrash. Where is it from? I think it's from Eicha Rabbah. So it's from Midrash Rabbah, which is a Midrashic collection. But this is the Midrash on Eicha, on the Book of Lamentations, because Jeremiah and Lamentations are so closely linked. And this is a Midrash. There are versions of it that are liturgical as well. And again, we have other versions of it. When do we say it? Like, in Slichot, before, since it wasn't that long ago, before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there's a Slicha where we say, it's like, I call it the Aneni prayer. We say, God, please answer us because of Abraham. He did the X for you. And please answer us because of Isaac. He did X for you. Please answer us because we go through all the way to David HaMelech, right? Because of Noah, we go through everybody, right? Answer us because of this one, answer us because of that one. There's a lot of prayers that are sort of modeled on that, what's called Zchut Avot, asking the matriarchs and patriarchs to intervene up in the heavens on our behalf. I think that's separately, I would say that's like another interesting topic, which maybe I'll teach about at some point, is that we have like a mixed relationship in Judaism with praying to dead people. We generally speaking don't do it, except that we actually do it all the time. But the Avot and Imahot seem to be in their own special category of dead people. They're not entirely gone. They remain involved in our lives as Jewish people, right? Meaning they're involved with the life of the nation. So this is a similar story that's being told about the Midrash. It could have brought you a much longer chunk, where each one of the matriarchs and patriarchs gets up. Again, this is Eicha, so this is the destruction of the temple. Each one gets up and says, God, how could you do this? I know they've been bad, but how could you destroy the temple? How could you exile your people? Not a good idea, God. They don't deserve it, right? And at least I don't deserve it, right? Each one of the matriarchs and patriarchs says that. And it's not working. The argument is not going anywhere with God. So here's Rachel. At that moment, Rachel jumped up before God and said, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, you know that your servant Jacob loved me excessively and worked on my behalf for my father for 7 years, and then it was time for me to marry my husband, and my father wanted to switch me. And this was very difficult for me. I wanted to marry him, so I told my husband and gave him a sign. Now notice that this version is a little bit different from the other version. In the other version, if you remember, Jacob gives Rachel the sign. Right? She says this is going to happen, and he's like, don't worry, I have a plan. Not in this version. This version is all Rachel. Okay? She says this is going to happen, and she gives her husband a sign. But then at the last minute, afterwards, I regretted that I had done this, and I had mercy on my sister, and I gave her the sign so that she wouldn't be embarrassed. And the switch happened. But not only that. Actually, the story goes on. She got under the bed, a little bit cut off at the bottom of the Rachel says, I got under the bed that night when they got married. And every time Yaakov spoke to Leah, she was quiet and I answered. Okay? Could this story get any worse, right? Or better, right, depending on your perspective. Not only did she give whatever these signs were, right, so that Yaakov would think that Leah was Rachel, but actually she did the voiceovers. She got under the bed, and every time that Leah was supposed to respond to him, Rachel in fact responded. She was under the bed on their wedding night, so you wouldn't remember this choice. And she says, "I treated her with kindness, and I didn't envy her, and I didn't I didn't let her be, embarrassed and disgraced. And you are God, the eternal King. You're merciful. How could you have envied the idol worship that your people were performing, and you've exiled your sons and they've been killed? How could you do such a thing?" And immediately, miyad, God was overcome with mercy and said, "Bishvilach Rachel, ani machzir et Yisrael mimkoman." For you, Rachel, anything. For you, Rachel, I'm going to return the Jewish people to their proper place. That's what it says in the verse. That's why the verse is written that way in Jeremiah, that God hears a voice weeping, or a voice is heard weeping, and God says, don't cry anymore. I'm going to return your children. I'm not going to have them in exile in perpetuity. right? It's Rachel's again modesty. It's Rachel's action. And again, I think it's so interesting because it's kind of a terrible story, right? It's kind of, I mean, she tricks her husband. She gives her sister the signs. She gets under the bed and voices her sister. But it seems like it's just the ticket, right? It is such an extreme example of a person giving up all ego, I guess is what I would say. Right? It's such an extreme example of a person overcoming ego that when she says to God, God, if I could do it, you could do it. That's basically what she says, right? If I could do it, you could do it. So, God sort of has to go with that. Yeah.
Where were the children that had to be recorded? Were they dispersed?
Yeah. I mean, and we still are.
They were big by that time.
Right. So this is children in the more like children of Israel children, right? This is the more metaphorical sense. This is the generations that come later, and you could say it's still going on today, right? I mean, there's still a diaspora today. We haven't had the ultimate redemption yet, but this promise stands in the book of Jeremiah, and this midrash is sort of continually looked to, is continually referenced, and again, you have to sort of put the pieces together, right? Because it's not evident in the story. I mean, there's a switch, sure, and I think everyone wonders at some point. Like, really? He was so in love with Rachel and he managed to marry Leah by mistake? Really? Right? I think the rabbis picked up on that also. Like, it shouldn't have been that easy for a switch to happen. And so the Midrashic tradition is telling you, don't worry, it wasn't that easy. It took a lot of planning, right? A lot of planning, a lot of coordination, because no, actually you can't just switch one woman for another so easily. Like, phew, we can all relax, right? It's not actually that easy to do. There was a lot of planning, a lot of coordination. So that's one sort of mystery that gets resolved by this Midrash. But I think the other piece is this overall intensity of Rachel, that she's always sort of driving events. I feel that, like I said, when you read the story in Genesis, I feel like when you read it a second and third time, I feel like she's in control, she's the driving force, and the Midrashim certainly see it that way, yeah.
I think humility is a better word than that.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, humility is like the other, that's probably a better translation of Tsenua in this case.
Also, I mean, under the bed, certainly you can tell when someone's talking next to you or under the bed.
Yeah, there's still, it's sort of far-fetched, it's sort of theatrical. I think it's always a question with Midrash of how literally you take the Midrash and whether you think they're actually projecting that story. And to me, what this says is, Rachel was in the bedroom, even if she wasn't actually in the bedroom, but she had to basically get into that bedroom in order to make this work. Right? And the story, I didn't bring you, again, it's a limited amount of time to bring you ultras, but the story stays that way throughout, right? Remember the Dudaim also, right? When Rachel's still trying to get pregnant and she gets those special flowers and she trades, right? She says to Leah, okay, you can have our husband tonight. Right? That's a very, even if I thought that having a co-wife was a good idea, which, right, obviously nobody really does, that's a very invasive way, right? That's their relationship is very interwoven. Like, they can't separate out the sister's relationship and their relationship each with Yaakov. It's all very intermingled. And so I think there's always something of that. And I think that's what the rabbis are telling us, right? Even if she's not actually in the bedroom, her voice is somehow in there. She's guiding the whole process. And God certainly sees it that way. And of course, it's this, whether Rachel thought it would have been better if the children came from her, but you mentioned the children. These children are the children of Israel. When we speak about the children of Israel, we mean Jacob's children. And Jacob had children with their handmaids also, but with Leah and with Rachel. So this whole story that Rachel engineers, that she makes happen from beginning to end, according to the rabbis, that is how the Jewish people come about. Right? That's integral to our history. You couldn't sort of separate that out, right? You could play the what if game, right? What if the children had all come from Rachel, etc. But basically, that's how our history is constructed, is through this story. And I think that's also a part of why Rachel is the one who sort of gets to, she gets the final word, because she's the mother of the children of Israel. Even though Leah technically, right, should be also, but no. It was Rachel's idea all along. Leah would never have gotten to have those children with Yaakov if Rachel hadn't stepped in and engineered things. And I think that's why she gets kind of that ultimate responsibility here. But I want to show you one other version of this story. And maybe actually, God was very tough on Rachel. I think so too.
She was very determined for
God could have, I mean, I feel like God could have made it easier for a lot of the Avot and Imahot. And by the way, as long as we're on that subject, if you look at source number 9, which I guess I skipped earlier on the previous page, this is when Yaakov is talking later on to Yosef, and this is something that comes up more than once. You know, Rachel doesn't get married, doesn't get buried where the other matriarchs and patriarchs are, because she dies on the way. And okay, where her exact grave is a subject of dispute. We have a gravesite for her in Beit Lechem. But, you know, somehow they were on the way. They were on the way to Ephrat, which Beit Lechem is on the way. It's where Ephrat is now. So he buried her on the way. And Yaakov says this to Yosef later on, is like, sort of in an apologetic way, maybe, right? Or it's argumentative, it's apologetic. We'll say it's apologetic, right? Like, you know, it was your mother. I know you weren't happy. I had to sort of bury her along the way. We were like on the road. But the fact that she was buried on the road, again, gets caught up in this midrash and takes on this significance. The significance that, the Rashi here is a little bit, no, the Rashi's not cut off. In source number 10, right, that Rashi says there, well, I didn't take her even into Beit Lechem all the way. I didn't take her into the land because I buried her there along the way because Jacob knew. Now everybody's in on the story. Jacob knew that she would be there. She'd be buried on the road. She'd hear the children, meaning her great-great-great-grandchildren, many generations later being exiled. She'd hear them crying along the way. She would cry out to God, and God would listen. We've now sort of come full circle with our anachronistic stories. Okay, not only does this happen where Rachel, you know, the story of the signs and the story of Rachel crying out and God listening to her, but Jacob actually knows that this is going to happen. He knows that she's going to be the one to intervene already at that point, and so he purposely buries her there and is able to tell his son about that. I purposely buried her there because don't worry, you know, you may have grown up motherless, but she's there waiting for you. She's there. And there's another midrash source that I decided not to bring in the end of Joseph when he's sold into slavery in Egypt, and he's sort of along that way of him communicating also with his dead mother. It seems like where she's buried, she's on the way, and everybody sort of manages to pass by that site, and so everyone gets this chance to communicate with her because she is this great intermediary to God. And I'll show you one more example of that. This is source number 11. So this is like maybe a less traditional source. It's from a tchina, which is their Yiddish prayers composed generally by women for women in Yiddish, which I don't speak. I read it, but not well. So I wrote this for you in English. But I took a few courses that had to do with this in college, and this is from one of the books that I got from them. It's really, really interesting to see, you know, when women write prayers, which biblical characters they appeal to. It's not that they're all women. It's just interesting to see the appeal that certain characters have and why it is that they reach out to certain ones. So this is a tzchina. It's called the tzchina of Sara, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And it actually appeals to the merit of all of the matriarchs, but Rachel gets sort of the most airtime. And may the merit of our faithful mother Rachel, to whom you promised that through her merit her children Yisrael would be delivered from exile, cause the promises to be fulfilled. And then she tells the story. For when Yisrael was led into exile, they passed not far from the grave in which our mother Rachel lies. Yisrael begged the enemy to allow them to go to Rachel's grave, and there they began to weep and cry out, "Our dear mother, how can you watch us being led into exile?" Then Rachel went up to Hashem Yisbarach, to God, with a bitter cry and said, Ribono shel olam, your compassion is certainly much greater than the compassion of a human being. You, who are certainly a merciful and gracious God, surely have compassion. A little like reference there, right, to compassion of a human being. Doesn't tell the full story, but Rachel is for sure the one who goes to God and says, listen, this has to end. God answered her, you are right. I will take your children out of their misery. Thus we ask that this may come to pass for her merit and for the merit of her mother Leah. That's really the only shout out that Leah gets in this one. And that through her merit you may illumine our eyes so we may overcome darkness. So again, this is a tchina. This is a prayer. She makes a lot of appearances in the prayers. And so the story really hasn't ended, right? What you asked before about, who are the children? We are the children. The story hasn't ended. And already, this is, I think, 1800s, right? Already when these 1800s, early 1900s, already when these tchinas are being written, it's basically modern times, right? And we still have Rachel to rely on. And by the way, she makes an appearance also, again, in the Amim Noraim prayers, in the liturgy of the high holidays. those verses, Kol Barama Nishma, right, that God, the God Jeremiah verse, that God hears Rachel crying and God says, it's going to be okay. That also makes an appearance in our high holiday davening because it's a promise that it was promised, it seems, right? God responded to Rachel. It's a promise as yet unfulfilled, but it seems that that God has, God trusts in Rachel, and Rachel has confidence after this that she's going to be listened to. And again, this isn't the only midrashic version, but it sort of continually recurs. And again, lots of prayers. There are many prayers that evoke the merit of our ancestors in various ways. This one, though, picks up on Rachel specifically, and I think this ending is really interesting. Through her merit, you may illumine our eyes so we may overcome darkness. Does anyone else think that's a really interesting reference? I don't know if I'm reading into it too much here, but I think that Rachel's trickery, right, really, if we can call it that, involved deception, right, involved not having Jacob see what was really in front of him, whether she was actually, using her voice or however you want to say it. But it seems like everyone basically agrees that the outcome was so positive, right? What she did really lit up the world in some way. And what the composer of this Tchina is saying, again, through her merit, you may illumine our eyes so that we may overcome darkness. It's not just about redemption from exile. I mean, I think that's the implication here, and that's this whole Tchina, taken as a whole, is praying for redemption. But I think that this imagery of light illuminating our eyes, right, we should be able to see clearly. Rachel, I think, in some ways, right, all of the clarity in her life comes after death. Because, like you said, God made things really hard for Rachel in life. With the children, with dying in childbirth, with being married not where maybe on some level she should have been buried. But the clarity that comes later is that much stronger because of it. Right? She's in this strong position to argue with God on behalf of her children and her great-great-great-grandchildren. She's in this strong physical position, again, according to the tradition. She's on that road. She's there to hear the cries of everybody passing by. And she's this sort of beacon of moral clarity, of humility, of modesty, that sort of is meant to light the way for everybody who comes after her. And the last thing I'll end with, as I mentioned, this source sheet is online. And the last question that I wrote here so this question about Squidavote, and I wrote, if you were to pick an ancestor to invoke in prayer, who might it be and why? And the reason I was thinking about this is because, sort of prior to composing this class, I felt like, there's like all sorts of good reasons given. Like I said, we have all these prayers already constructed. So like Abraham, like what's great about Abraham? So he had. Yeah. All those people who we evoke in that way, right? So like Abraham's great for chesed, or you could say, for the binding of Isaac, and Isaac's also great for the binding of Isaac because he didn't protest, right? You could like come up with reasons. Generally, I think they're reasons from the biblical text. Rachel has this reason that really comes from the rabbinic tradition, right? It's really outside the biblical text. And I thought to myself, wow, if you get to play that game, right, then it's really a much more interesting question to me, again. Might be that for you the biblical texts are already enough, but to me it seems like so much more of an interesting question that if I can let all the midrashim, sort of overrun my mind, and I can think, about any story I've ever learned, right, even extra biblical stories about this character, which character would I pick, to evoke in prayer and prayer for a specific thing, right? Not just like in the merit of Abraham, let there be redemption, which is sort of like a general prayer, right? But in the merit of so and so, I want specifically such and such, which is linked in some way to that person's character traits, right? Because that's really what we're saying with Rachel. We're really saying, God, and the Midrashim are saying, right, God, you need to be forgiving because you can't possibly be outdone by one of your own creations, right? Rachel was that humble. She was that forgiving. She was that lacking in jealousy, lacking in ego. So you, God, you're going to have to give it up, right? Because a person, right, flesh and blood has already shown you up in that regard, and so you're going to have to give it up. So again, for me, the question to end with is, which specific character traits would you want to evoke to God for a specific outcome? And you are all here, so you are free to answer me. But this source sheet is online, and it's what we call in Safari a collaborative source sheet, which means that once you log into Safari, you can actually put your answer on the web page, and it will show up with your answer underneath it. So I've done this before with collaborative source sheets, meaning I do it for my students all the time. I'll make a source sheet and say, I want you all to put your answers to my question on the sheet, and then they show up the next day. But I haven't done it in one of these, so especially for people who are watching online, the source sheet's staying up there. It's open, it's collaborative. I won't be taking it down at any point, I don't think. And so people are always welcome to go and add their answers to any of the questions, really, because I ask questions on sources, but I'm especially interested in asking that question about which biblical character you would choose to evoke for the merit of for ancestral merit, and why. So I'll stop there, but I'll happily take comments and responses.
Where did they bury her?
Yeah, she made it to Marat Machpelah.
Oh, she did. Yeah. She lived long.
I think that it's not humble. I mean, I don't react to her being humble. I react to her being self-aware, strong, and because she has sense herself, she can then say to God, "Oh, you know, right." And I don't think she could do that.
Right. So not just humility, but really a strong sense of self.
Yeah, I think that there's something
Okay, I'll say goodbye to the online viewers, and thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll comment on the website, and enjoy the rest of Global Day.